In the spirit of our nation's independence and freedom, here now is my interview with Jack, a man who shows us all how hope prevails even in the most dire of circumstances. Welcome to America's Hope. My first guest and only guest of this hour is someone that I really want to introduce you to because he is a survivor. He has survived the Holocaust and recalls the Allied rescue on the 80th D-Day anniversary, which took place several weeks ago here in the United States. Here's a quote from our guest. Finally, the Americans, the British, and the Allies were coming, says Holocaust survivor Jochen Werfel, better known as Jack. Jack Werfel joins us now on America's Hope. Sir, it is an honor to welcome you to America's Hope because, in my estimation, you are the epitome of what hope stands for. Talk to me, please, about what it was like growing up in Germany. You're at that particular time, of course, you were born in Germany. Your mother was Roman Catholic, as I understand. Your father was Jewish. Take me back to that time.
The other way around.
The other way around. Thank you for correcting me.
My mother was Jewish. My father was Catholic.
Okay, and as I understand, your mother, unfortunately, was sent to Auschwitz.
That's correct.
Please take me back to that time and what was going on in your mind as a young child growing up in Germany.
Yeah, actually, originally, Kelly, we're from Austria, and we lived near Vienna. My father worked in Vienna. He worked for President Schuschnigg, who was the president of Austria at the time. And of course, we knew that Hitler was trying to take over Austria and make it part of Germany. And Mr. Schuschnigg and my dad, the government, we were very much against it. So when my father knew that this was going to happen very soon, my father and mother sent me to Berlin, to where my grandparents lived. And he felt it would be a little safer for my brother, Peter, and myself to live in Berlin rather than in Austria when Hitler was coming in. And of course, this all happened. So my brother and I, we moved to Berlin. My mother went into exile to Czechoslovakia, and she lived in Prague for about a year or two. And then eventually Hitler, of course, took over Czechoslovakia too. And my mother was again in great danger there because they were again arresting all the Jewish people. There were many of them in the Czech Republic. So she came back to Berlin, and she asked us, well, at that point, I should really tell you that my grandfather in Berlin, who was a wonderful man, he was very concerned about his grandchildren, his two boys, and he sent us to a place called Dangast, which is right on the North Sea in northern Germany. And he sent us there to a camp to stay there a few months, to be out of Austria, of course, and also as well as Berlin. But instead, as time went on, my father was arrested with Schuschnigg, the president. They were arrested together in Austria when Hitler walked in, and they were sent to Germany to a concentration camp. My mother came back from, as I said, from the Czech Republic, and she wanted to live with us for a little while, so we left our camp on the North Sea and went back to my mother for a while, who had gotten an apartment in an apartment house in Berlin, and she wanted us to live with her there for a while. So we did, and I started school there. I was 6 years old, and one day my brother and I were sent on a mission by my mother letter by subway to a certain place in Berlin. We had to change subways, and we did. And once we came up the steps of the subway, there would be a gentleman who would approach us. He would have a code word, and when we hear the right code word, we would give him the letter my mother gave us, and in turn, he gave us a letter for my mother. So we went back to by subway back to our house, to our apartment where we lived with my mother. And as we came to the corner of Meidikerstrasse, where we lived, we noticed that there were quite a few cars parked in front of our building, the apartment house, from the Gestapo and from the SS. So we decided we better wait there on the corner and see what's happening with all these Gestapo and SS people. And we could always ask my mother once they would leave as to what was going on in the building. Well, to our surprise, after we waited there for a while, it was my mother who was taken out of the building, put into a Gestapo car, and driven away, and the rest of the cars followed.
The remarkable Jack Werfel story continues in just a moment.
So it was a very terrible feeling. My mother had told us before, weeks before, that if anything would ever happen to her in Berlin through the Nazis, that she gave us the name and the phone number of an attorney, and we should call him, and he would try to help us to accommodate us until we would know exactly what was going on with my mother. And that was done. And my brother and I then decided that it took us like 3 days to find out which prison my mother was put in by the Gestapo. There were several of them in Berlin. And we found the prison. And my brother and I, we were just little kids, you know. We just walked up to the prison and walked into the prison, and sure enough, eventually we found the place where my mother was confined. And we saw my mother, we talked to her, and my mother was so surprised that we were there. And she said, "Boys, you shouldn't be here. I don't want you to have happened to you what happened to me. Let me tell you, be good boys. Always pay attention to your teachers. Education is very, very important. Make sure you get a good education in case I'm not right around. And in the meantime, I would like you to leave immediately this prison because I don't want you guys to be arrested here and the same things would happen to you that are happening to me." So we left. And as we were running out of the prison, we were finally caught by an SS guard. There were several of them who paid no attention to us because I guess we were just little kids. And anyway, the SS at the final gate, he caught us, and we wrestled with him, and we got away from him, and we ran out of the prison. He followed us. We ran through the streets of Berlin, and you know, at our age, we could run a little faster than he could. So eventually, we lost him, and that really was the last time I ever saw my mother.
Wow.
It was the last time I ever spoke to my mother. After this, my mother was taken to, as you mentioned, to Auschwitz, and she was killed there.
Jack, when I hear your story, it's heartbreaking. And what happened in the aftermath of finding out that your mother had been killed in Auschwitz?
Well, at that time, we didn't know it. So we just after we had left the prison, we called this attorneys where our mother had told us we should call him if anything would ever happen to her. And we did, and he put us up for a couple of days. And Then we took the train. He helped us. We took the train and we went back to our summer camp on the North Sea, northern Germany. This camp was run by a lady by the name of Irma Franzen Heinrichsdorf. She was one of the most wonderful people I ever met in my life. And she really became my second mother because instead of a few weeks, I ended up living there and with her for 17 years. I was 17 years old, rather, when I left there. I was 6 years when I got there.
How did you hide your Jewish identity in Nazi Germany under the rule of Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, let me tell you that story. When my father and mother sent us originally from Austria to my grandparents in Berlin, they took us in Berlin to a Catholic church, and they had my brother and myself baptized Catholic as a protection against the Nazis. So whenever we had to complete any papers or we were asked who we were and what we were doing, we were always Catholic rather than Jewish. And when we would have to walk with our relatives and our grandparents down the street, they always had to wear the yellow star called Jude, which means Jewish. And Peter and I didn't have to wear it because we were Catholic.
In other words, escaping from what you were witnessing unfolding in Germany, where they were literally exterminating Jewish people. Did you talk amongst yourselves about how do we get out of this?
Well, my brother and I, we were determined to do anything to do whatever we had to do in order to stay alive. And being baptized was one of the things. My grandfather, who paid for us to the lady at the camp in northern Germany, my grandfather eventually, all of his relatives, his partners, other people that he was close to and that he knew, they were all killed by the Nazis. They were arrested, put on a train, and taken to concentration camps. Most of them ended up in Auschwitz. And my grandfather then decided to take a few pills, and he died. And I still have the notification where it said that my grandfather died in the Jewish hospital in Charlottenburg, Berlin. So this is how my grandmother lived for a couple more months, and I don't really know what she did and how she did it, but eventually she also died, I imagine, for the same reason, for the Nazis, because she also, of course, was Jewish. She was my mother's mother.
Yeah, Jack, it's your story is so important for such a time as this, as you know. I want to take a break, and when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk to you more about getting beyond Germany when you saw Allied soldiers coming in to free so many people, including yourself, from the, the Gestapo and the SS and Adolf Hitler. I'm talking to Jack Werfel. We're going to take a break. We'll come right back to hear more of his incredible, real life, dramatic story of a time in our history known as the Holocaust during World War II. Back in just a moment with America's Hope. My Two Lives. And Jack is joining us from his home in Baltimore. Jack, you were telling us in the first segment of this show what it was like growing up at this particular time and the tragedy that unfolded in losing many of your relatives to the maniacal and just the despotic nature of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. They died at the hands of Germans in Auschwitz and other places, and some even took their own lives to avoid going to those death camps and those gas chambers. You survived. What was the hope that prevailed for you? And did you see that hope come to reality that you could be free when Allied forces made it into Germany?
Yeah, well, just prior to that, the lady that took care of of our camp, she also had two children, a son and a daughter. She, by the way, knew that our mother was Jewish, and she kept us there at her own risk, because if they would have found out, the Nazis would have found out that she's protecting us, it would have been a great danger to her and to her children. But she told us that her children were in the Hitler Youth, and she suggested that we join the Hitler Youth, because if you don't join the Hitler Youth as a young boy or man, there's something wrong with you. And they would ask, who are you? Why are you not in the Hitler Youth? And so on. So in order to further save ourselves, we had to join the Hitler Youth, my brother and I, and we did. And you know, we would go to school in the morning at 8 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock the school was out, and our teacher, who I liked very much, a wonderful man, he would get on, he was an SS person and soldier, and he would get on his motorcycle after he changed into his black uniform and drive off to his SS meetings. We would have to go to work. Either we worked on a fishing boat or we had to work on farms, because all the men were in the service, and the farms and the food had to be further produced, and it was done so by older men, by women, and by children like ourselves. So we worked every day practically after that. But and in the meantime, my father was still in a concentration camp. He eventually was transferred to another concentration camp called Mauthausen, which is near Austria, actually where he was from, very close to the city of Linz, where he was born. And eventually he was liberated by the United States Army and freed when they came in. But at that point, he already had lost so much weight, and he was so sick of both of his lungs, were totally deteriorated, and people were asked to keep him alive and take care of him, and they did, but 2 months later, he died. But the story I like to tell you is when we were still in Dangasep on the North Sea, in the evenings, my brother and I, quite often, we would turn on the British Broadcasting Company to find out what was really going on in the world, because we knew that the Nazis were always telling us lies and strange stories that weren't even true. So one day I was 12 years old, and we were listening one night. We had to be very careful, because if you got caught listening to the BBC, you were really in trouble. But anyway, we listened to it, and all of a sudden we heard that Allied troops had landed in Normandy. Well, I can't tell you how we felt. We were waiting for a day like this. We were waiting for something to happen to get rid of the Nazis and Hitler, of course, you know. In the meantime, we had lost all of our relatives, our entire family. And so we listened to the radio, and I heard that the troops, Allied troops, had landed in Normandy and were fighting up the beaches and had established some final places up on the beach and starting to go inland. So we felt wonderful about it. This was our hope that something would happen to them. And we all know what happened eventually. But here, as I told you, I lived with this lady in this camp and with the Hitler Youth. And by the way, our teacher, the SS teacher, also knew who we were. And he was a good friend of the lady who ran our camp, who I called my second mother. She loved us. She was wonderful. She was great. She saved our lives. So between our being Catholicized, being made Catholic, joining the Hitler Youth, having a teacher who was in the SS, having the lady who knew who we were, through these wonderful people and occurrences and things, we were saved.
Wow. Jack, it's an incredible story of heroism, people risking their own lives to save you and your brother. And when the Normandy D-Day invasion took place, how you've talked about how that signified hope, and then Allied forces coming across to conquer Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. And of course, the rest is history. But it also paved the way for you to become a U.S. citizen. Uh, Talk to me about that through your recollection of coming to America finally and getting that chance to be an American. What did that feel like for you?
Okay, when I was 17 years old, my brother was only a year older than I am. We had a call from the U.S. Army in southern Germany, and they said that they found out who my father was and my mother, and they know that we had asked to come to the United States, which we had done in the past and were turned down or nothing happened. And they said, at this point, we would like you boys to come to the United States and we will help you to come. And sure enough, they sent us immediately to a camp where we stayed for a little while. And then the U.S. Army put us on an airplane with a bunch of other children. It was called the United States Committee for Care of European Children, was financed by Jewish people and by Catholic people. My brother and I, we were actually coming in under the Catholic group, but we were all on the same airplane, and they flew us from Germany to Glasgow in Scotland, from Scotland to Halifax. We lost an engine on the way, but that seemed to be no problem with a 4-engine airplane from the ASA. And it seemed to be no problem to the captain, and he landed in Halifax, and the plane was fixed. We had to stay there overnight. It was absolutely wonderful. Now, I had to stay in New York for about 6 months until the U.S. Army got our papers together, because we had no papers at this point. So we couldn't go to school, we couldn't work yet until we were to wait for our papers. And they put us up in a very nice place, took care of us along with many other children. And during the day, we just got to know New York, and I picked San Francisco as the place that I wanted to go to. So when finally my papers came and I was able to leave New York and go anywhere I wanted to go in the United States, I went, someone told me that Greyhound bus station would be the cheapest way to get to San Francisco. So I went to the Greyhound bus station and gave them the money and said, here, I like to, in my broken English, I like to go to San Francisco. And they counted the money and they said, well, I'm sorry, but you don't have quite enough here. We can't give you a ticket quite all the way to San Francisco. I said, well, how far can I go with the money that I have? And they said, Baltimore. And I said, is that on the way to San Francisco? And they said, well, yes, more or less. I said, give me a ticket. So we went to Baltimore. And I was still here.
And you're still there in Baltimore, but you also, later on, after arriving in Baltimore, ultimately got drafted into the United States Army. the very people that helped rescue you, the United States military. You're now serving as a U.S. citizen in the United States Army. What was that experience like for you, especially when you were part of the Color Guard and ultimately went back to Normandy, the place that marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, and of course the hope personified in you being freed by American forces?
The first thing, I had absolutely no monies. I didn't know anyone there, but I got myself a job the following day in a necktie factory, and I worked there for a year while I was going to school, taking English 1, 2, 3, and 4 high school, all in 1 year. And my English was good enough after 1 year that I was able to get a job, get out of the factory and get a job with an small insurance company. And I worked there. And I was there for 3 years, and I was drafted, got a letter, and I was drafted into the United States Army. I went to Camp Breckenridge to the 1st Airborne Division and for basic training. And finished my basic training there, which was pretty tough. But we were used to things like that. So after I finished my basic training, I was called in by the people who ran the First Airborne Division, and they said, "We just found out. We just looked at your Form 20, which is my personnel form, that you ought to speak German, of course, fluently, and in Germany we need more and a lot of interpreters at this point. There's a great need for it because we're training the German army, the German people to be the German army our way, and we need some interpreters to help out with that." So I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd rather go to Germany." This was the war in Korea at that time, to Korea. And that's what we were all trained for, light weapon infantry. So we were supposed to go to Korea. And myself and another fellow who spoke Norwegian, we were the only two who were accepted, and we went to Europe. And I was stationed with the 1st Infantry Division in Würzburg, Germany. And I was working there as an interpreter. It was a real honor. And we did. And we went there. And as a color guard, we went on Omaha Beach and all the various places where thousands of our troops had been killed, especially of the 1st Infantry Division. And it was such an honor.
We'll be back with more of my story with Jack Warfel in just a moment.
The British Broadcasting Company when I was 12 years old, and all of a sudden I'm there. I'm in Normandy in front of all these fabulous leaders like Eisenhower. I so admired Eisenhower. And
wow. I mean, Jack, it had to be an amazing moment for you then, and now 80 years since then, as people still remember D-Day, Normandy, and the fact that you not only went through Germany but survived it under Hitler's rule, and you lost family members because they were Jewish, and you saw United States military members rescue and liberate Europe, and now you're serving the United States military as an American citizen now, and you're there on the 10th reunion of what happened on Normandy, and now the 80th anniversary that many people have just finished celebrating. What is the value you want Americans to know about America still being that city on a hill, giving forth light in darkness and hope through despair?
First of all, I was not a citizen, just to mention that. I was drafted. I was I wanted to become a citizen, and it takes 5 years to be in this country to be a citizen. So I was drafted as a person who was there to be eventually a citizen, but I was not a citizen yet. And a matter of fact, after I was drafted, I volunteered to go to the officers' candidate school, and I was eventually, first I was accepted, then I was turned down when they found out that I was not a citizen. So that's why I was in the 1st Infantry Division anyway. It's just amazing what the United States did at that point, and especially with the money and the help that they gave Germany at that time, and help people over there who were starving and dying. And this was done under the Marshall Plan. So the Germans should be very, very grateful to the Americans for that for the rest of their lives. For me, Kenny, it was just the most exceptional thing that I could be in the United States, be a soldier, be in Normandy, where D-Day occurred. One morning, they woke us up and they said, at 5 o'clock, we want you to be at a certain place at the beach to color guard. I will never forget that day, Kelly. Here we were, early in the morning, just to color guard, the American flag, dipping the American flag while the bugler was playing. The sun was rising over the British Channel. It was such an unbelievable moment. It's such an honor for me, with my background and where I came from, and my feelings, and how I felt, and who I was. It's a moment that, of course, I will never forget, you know.
Yeah. Jack, I've got to ask you, based on all that you've lived through, and thank God that you have been protected and God has taken care of you and your family. I know your daughter's right there by your side. They're in Baltimore. You are today 92 years of age, and you have lived to tell the story of a horrible time in world history. 6 million Jews were estimated to have been annihilated because of evil. And you see what's happening today on college campuses around America after the attack, the Hamas attack on innocent civilians in Israel that took place October 7th, 2023. What is your message to the world?
Well, it was one of the most horrible things that ever happened, that I ever heard of. That this could happen again. I really felt that the world was educated enough, and we went through the Hitler period, that we would never let anything like this happen again. And here, all of a sudden, this fight between Hamas, attacking Israel in the way they did. And this was the time, just prior to that, my daughter Dana and her husband Tom, they had asked me, which hundreds of people had asked me in the past, and I always said no, because there are thousands of other people who could do it better, who lived this similar life like I did. They wanted me to write a book so that my family would always know, my children, my grandchildren, their grandchildren, and so on, that they would always know how we came to this country, what happened during the Hitler regime, and so on. That book is now out, and it came out. It was published almost the same day that Hamas and Israel, that this horrible thing happened there with Hamas. And the book now, which was only for my family, is now being, it's all over the place. It's already in 3 or 4 continents. I think there are over 1,000 books that have been sold, bought rather, here in the United States. And it's called My Two Lives. And this was my life in Europe until I was 17, and then my life in the United States, which was a wonderful, wonderful life. You know, when I came back out of the army, I started my own insurance business. I built an agency which became very successful among the top 200 agencies in this country. And I just had a wonderful life in this country. I hope it goes to a lot of these young people who don't know, and maybe give them some education as to what happened and what could happen through things like Hamas, and what happened in the universities and colleges in this country all of a sudden, that everybody is against Israel and for Hamas and so on, which is, to me, it really hurt my feelings in the worst way, because I was so proud of this country and that this could happen in this country. And even the leaders of these schools, talking before Congress, had no excuse and no explanation as to what's happening.
Jack, I hear you loudly and clearly. I've got to go, but I can't thank you enough for having the courage that you had as a child, you and your brother, and for those heroes that stepped in to help save you and your brother from the dastardly deed inflicted upon Jewish people there in Germany. And there were some Christians, of course, as well as gypsies. And the bottom line, though, is that you have survived this, and not only survived it, you have overcome this, and you contributed greatly, not only to your past, but to America's future. And certainly you're doing that in your book, My Two Lives. And what you just talked about in terms of what's happening in America today and in Israel and around the world is so important. So my final question for you now, based on all that you've lived through in your 92 years and your incredible journey that God has blessed you with, what is your hope for America?
Well, my hope for America is that it will continue to be what it has been, not what it is. I think there's a lot of things in this country today, in our government, and with the feeling of our younger people. I heard that most of the youngsters between the age of 18 and 28 know very little. I think only 30% of those people had ever even heard of Hitler or what happened during those days. And I just hope that education will be somehow changed in this country, that people will learn what happened, because this can happen again, and this can happen here. You never know. It happened in Germany when no one thought it could possibly happen in Germany, and it did happen there. So I just hope that people will learn, that schools will teach this is part of history. What is more important in history than what happened there? Right now, this anti-Semitism is all over the place. It's not only in this country, but it's even in Germany, it's in Europe, it's in other countries. And I just hope that teachers in schools and our government will somehow understand the danger of all of this and will do something about it.
Your story is indeed sobering and humbling. I thank God for you, Jack. Thanks for being on America's Hope.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, after I was in the United States Army, 3 years later, I was a United States citizen.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So proud of you. Thank you. Thank you. So pleased to meet you. It's an honor. His name is Jochen Jack Werfel. His book is My Two Lives. He's a survivor and an overcomer. When we return, my final word on America's Hope.